Hello. Some familiar names already. Feel free to drop a note in the chat. You can introduce where you're calling in from, maybe what organization you're from, and we'll get, oh, we have a hand already, and we'll get started here in a few minutes. Hey, Rob, nice to see you. Awesome. Okay. Give everyone a few more minutes. Hey, Scott. Nice to meet you. Who else do we have on the line? Jillian. Nice to see you. It's been a while since we've spoken. Anna, hello. Brenna. Awesome. Chatham Kent. Skylar. Hi, Noreen. Big fans of cups here. Candy, nice to meet you. Okay. We have an absolutely packed slide deck as usual, so we'll give everyone a couple more minutes and then maybe we'll jump in with some introductions from Matt and I. Oh, hey, Manuel. Glad you could join us. Awesome. Hey, Brittany. Krista. Okay, why don't we'll jump in. It's about 2 minutes after and we'll let everyone catch up. Hey, Renee. First, we wanted to do a quick round of introductions. Oh, Karen, I assume that's a stray hand, but let us know. We'll do a quick round of introductions and then hopefully align on why we're here. And so Matt, go first and then I'll jump in.
Awesome, thanks, Jesse. So Matt Parker, I run the tech arm at HelpSeeker and describe myself as a big old data nerd. And so that's what I really focus on at the company. Off to you, Jesse.
Thanks, Matt. And so I'm EVP of Strategic Services. I've worked with many of you on the call. I oversee the consulting portfolio as well as the Carto portfolio, which we'll talk about today. I'm based here in Toronto, and so looking forward to kind of chatting with you guys throughout the day. So today we wanted to talk a little bit about data and analytics and how it helps address complex social issues. We wanted to show you some of the products that we have to do that. And then Matt's going to lead us through looking forward, a slightly more ambitious conversation about AI and how it might be used responsibly within social infrastructure planning over the coming months and years. Yeah, so we'll jump in. So bridging the gap. Today, we really wanted to talk about the bridging the gap between social policy, and you'll hear me use social policy and social infrastructure planning interchangeably, but I really mean sort of the same thing. And we mean social infrastructure in the broadest sense of the term. So all of the people, organizations, resources, financials that go into resolving or responding to complex social issues, and how we might bridge the complexity of that with technology and with data. We're going to start this in a different way than I intended. And for my New Brunswick folks, I don't know if there's any of you on the call, you'll be very familiar with this. I think it was about a week ago, the Advocate for Children, Youth, and Seniors in New Brunswick had a fairly damning, frankly, review paper on social policy. And this isn't to pick on New Brunswick, because I think what the paper really highlighted is that these issues aren't unique to New Brunswick. When we sent this paper to many of our partners across the country, I was sort of astounded at how many people responded to us and said, yeah, that's what I've been saying. I've been working in social infrastructure for 10, 15, 20 years, and that resonates with me deeply. And that was people all across the province. So I thought I'd go through this. And if you haven't read it, drop me a note. I will send it to you, or just do a Google in order to kind of place us on data to what end, because data is a really popular topic. It's at every conference. We present on it all the time. But really, what are we using it for and how is it going to respond to the ultimate goal, which is resolving complex social issues in a very complex environment. So I'm really kind of cutting the findings short, but just for the sake of this discussion, there was five five main points to it. Human resource misalignment. So one of the things it highlighted was planning for complex social issues and responses is disconnected from actual service needs, and we focus on cost over outcomes, and that's a layover from government procurement. Really, one of the issues is if we're not aware of service needs, then it's impossible to actually align resources correctly. The second is similar, but budgeting detached from reality. So we ignore objective targets and measurable outcomes, relying on outdated status quos. In communities I speak to, again, not picking on New Brunswick by any means, across the country, often we have conversations about this is what our social needs are, this is what we think we are, and then here's our budgeting process, and the difficulty of actually marrying those two at all levels of government, but also non-government agencies as well. A lack of outcome measurement. Social policy outcomes are rarely tracked against clear goals, and I'm sure every single person on the call won't argue with that, which creates a deficiency in hard targets for policy success. So how do we know? How do we know we got where we wanted to go, and the difficulty of measuring that across really complex systems? Other findings were rule adherence over results, which is less data focused, but also interesting. So employees incentivized to follow procedures instead of solving problems, which stifles innovation and discretion. And then crisis funding over prevention. And anyone who's been in the homelessness sector, like myself, for the last 15 years, we've been hammering on prevention, but it's actually very difficult within our systems to measure prevention and implement prevention. And in part, that has to do with data. This isn't unique. I think we actually presented this slide, I think it was the end of last year, and multiple papers had come out and advocate reports throughout the year saying, hey, we're funding a lot, but we're really not sure what the transparency for outcomes is. That's not to say that people aren't doing good work, but there's no systematic way for us to, or we've not yet figured out a systematic way for us to measure outcomes against our what's actually happening against our desired outcomes. So what does this have to do with data? I suspect some of you have connected the dots, but I really, really liked this quote in the paper. It said, what if the governance system itself was set up to defeat effective social policy governance? What if there are good people, which there are, there's many, many, many good people, including yourselves, working in this area across the country, and decent resources, but the system is set up on incentives and assumptions so perverse that they have no chance to succeed. And so what this paper did a really good job of a review is saying, hey, this isn't the fault of any one person. It's really a years-long systemic issue because social policy is complex and we don't have the levers we need in order to effectively respond. So comes back to data, and I love the concept of good intentions, good people, and how do we turn that into measurable outcomes, aligning with resources and actual needs. So how can data illuminate the disconnect between demand for social supports and supply? If you've ever been in a meeting with me, it's a talking point of mine of supply and demand calibration. How do we enable objective and reality-based financial planning tied to social outcomes, not just fiscal scenarios that are unrealistic given the complexity of social context that we live in? How do we go from rule adherence to results-focused governance? How do we empower people responding to complex issues to be nimble in their thinking and have the data they need in order to effectively respond? And how do we go from emergency management into preventative planning? And to what extent does predictive analysis help us do that? So where do you start? And I'm going to start where we did. And many of our customers are on the call, our partners are on the call. And you don't start with predictive. You start with the easier stuff, but the important stuff, the foundations. So Carto is our social data analytics platform. We really like to refer to it as it's your partner in solving complex social issues because it's not just a platform, but it's a social expert, a social partner who sits with you and tries to unpack how Carto, specifically the data in it, can help you, but how all of the other data sets and all the other literature and all the other best practices and connections we have across the country, how those can be adapted into your unique needs and solutions. Here's just another view, and I'm going to go through in more detail Carto, but a data analytics platform. It uses publicly available information, some great neighborhood level data. We also have an AI integration. So it comes up with some level one, I'd say, insights and descriptive analysis on what the data is. Imagine it's a pretty smart research analysis or research intern, if you will. Along with it goes a social expert. So you get a dedicated social expert throughout the year. And then other tools and technologies that we use with Carto to leverage additional value. But I'm going to show you, as promised, a few of the actual things we've done with it or the use cases of Carto. So these are new to a lot of people, so I'm going to go slowly. What you're looking at is provincial maps. And so through the census, what we're able to do is look at community level data and then also neighborhood level data. So any of Saskatchewan people in the house, this is the province. I hope it looks familiar. And what we're looking on the left-hand side is the province divided up into communities. The darker the color means the higher the percentage of people who are 65 years and older living in that community. The lighter the color, the fewer. In the middle one, we have another indicator layered on, which is living alone. So the darker the purple, the higher the percentage of people living alone. Here, what we've done is we've looked at them together. So in the dark blue areas that are highlighted on the right-hand side, what we can see is the communities with the highest percentage of people living alone and the highest percentage of 65 years and older. In some communities, that's upwards of 70% of the community is 65% of older. And as far as living alone, upwards of 36% of people living alone. Why do you care? From a provincial advocacy standpoint, really interesting. We know that older adults and them living alone is a risk factor for health issues, loneliness, homelessness. There's a number of sort of risk factors related. So it helps us to make comparisons. And for my municipal folks in the room, we know that every single time council wants to know something about a social issue, they're going to ask, well, how do we compare? How do we compare to another community? And this is the tool that allows you to do that along any of the census indicators and layer them accordingly. This, we're going to go down to community level. And so this is Winnipeg. And what this does is a similar principle, but it allows you to look at the unique demographics and census data within a particular community. So here I have it marked as immigrants. So the higher the darker the blue, the higher the percentage of immigrants. It also tells me some of the averages for certain census indicators. So median age, median household income, low income measure after tax, unemployed, the percentage of racialized individuals, and then core housing need, an important core housing stat. What we can also see is a number of additional stats down the side. So this is your, again, this is your research intern, your research analysis, and the ability to pull fast insights from your census data in a slightly different way than census presents it. What I think is cool though, and we're actually working with a community right now to use this information to develop a targeted neighborhood by neighborhood community engagement strategy for a crime plan, safety plan update. And so unrelated to crime or safety, what I've done here is click one of the neighborhoods that had the highest percentage of newcomers. And then when you click on that actual neighborhood, you still see the all of Winnipeg stats on the top, but what we're seeing down the side is the unique profile for that neighborhood. So family, 48%, females, 48%. Well, that's on par with the rest of the population. We can see the median age is 33, so actually quite a bit younger than the median age of the rest of the province. We can see that largely it's working age population between 15 and 64 years of age, average family size, 2.8, and right around the median household income. We can also see that about 13% of the population is low income, which is a little bit more than the overall for Winnipeg. A lot you can do with this data, and we've used it to inform where support should be. We've used it to inform where satellite supports should be. We've looked at this relative to other municipal infrastructure, where to put recreation centers, and like I mentioned, using it as a community by community guide for how we might engage with different populations in different neighborhoods to ensure diversity of perspectives and opinions in new social infrastructure plans. And this is where it gets even cooler. I don't know if my city of Thunder Bay friends are on the line, but we work together on the youth gang and gun violence prevention program. We're really focusing on upstream, so youth and family support at an early age. And one of the inquiries we did in the needs assessment was we wanted to understand how well youth and families were connected to supports given Thunder Bay's vast geographic area. Same thing, same pattern. On the left, what you see is one parent families. Absolutely nothing wrong with one parent families. I came from one myself, but we do know that some one parent families might want additional supports in regards to childcare, in regards to other aspects. So we see one parent families. The darker the color, the higher the percentage. And then the walk score is something entirely different created by HelpSeeker. So what we did was we mapped all the organizations and programs in their community, totaling 460 organizations and 1,700 programs. And then we created a walk score, which is a 15-minute walk time or less. We wanted to know, based on where you are in Thunder Bay, how long would you have to walk? Are you within a 15-minute walk to supports and services? So you can see up here, I've selected the childcare and parenting service category. And then on the map on the far right, what I've done is mark which areas have the highest percentage of one parent families and then the least access via walking through to child and parenting services. So all of a sudden, really interesting. We can see which areas of the community we can go in, we can speak to members of those neighborhoods and communities and ask them, validate whether childcare and parenting would be helpful for them. We can plan municipal services. We can again plan charitable outreach services. So there's a number of things we can do. All of this, what it really infers is demand, what we're trying to proxy, because demand data is so hard to collect at a local level, is we're trying to estimate what might people need and where. The final one I'll go through now that we're on a roll is this very, very similar principle. But we did it in Moncton. We're creating a social inclusion strategy. And one of the aspects we heard in Moncton that was limiting social inclusion was transit and the ability for individuals and families and youth to access the supports, the social connections, jobs, any number of things that would allow them to feel socially and economically included. So same thing on the left, we have low income after tax. The darker the color, the higher percentage of families, individuals who are under low income after tax. And then transit score works similarly to the walk score. But what we did is we took the actual GIS transit files, we took the transit stops and the actual bus routes, and we were able to see here on the right, this is the community. There's only one neighborhood that has one of the highest percentages of low income, but the lowest percentage of, as far as quintiles go, transit access. I think I probably don't need to fill in the gaps for you at this point of all the different things you can do, knowing that information and how many people live there to start to make different decisions or go out and validate some of the assumptions we might have about what's needed in the community and the impact that might have. So, does this resolve the very complex systematic social policy challenges? No, it doesn't. And it doesn't totally resolve what that report was talking about, or I think what all of you and certainly we're facing on a day-to-day, but it is a good start. So it transforms public data into accessible insights and it sets a foundation. And I think we all, upon reflection at HelpSeeker, have thought, okay, that was a win. That was a necessary first start. But now what we're really thinking is it enough to address systemic policy issues? And if that's just the first start, how might we continue to build on the tech and data innovations that are available to make things broadly available to communities across the country who are in very different levels of their journey in as far as data maturity, data collection, data integration. I'm going to hand it over to my friend, proclaimed data nerd, Matt, to talk a little bit about what we're up against as far as complexity.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, so Jesse gave some great examples there of kind of the ways we can use data, but taking a step back, it really is a challenge. I mean, we hear in the news all the time how people are using analytics or AI to solve all these big problems, but it's really the devil's in the details. And I know I'll probably hear a groan out of Jesse later. I always say that. But really, if you look at an individual over their lifetime, we're now at generating petabytes of data. But out of all that, for studying one outcome or trying to track one outcome, it may only be, 100 rows of data on this person that you actually need to effectively track that or kind of analyze that or provide projections moving forward. And so here are just some examples of some of the data we can use. And this is a chunk of this can actually be obtained in open data, but you have all this data out there. What data do you focus on? And then how do you link, clean, and kind of understand the data? Really makes this a complex challenge. And so what you need to do is kind of approach this in a more layered manner. Looking at this, it's funny, I switched between kind of more public sector and more private sector in my career. And I thought, entering the private sector, the data would be amazing. There's tens of millions of dollars invested in this data at some companies, but it's always shades of terrible. And so what you have to do is really understand the data, the quality, and what you can do with this to really be effective in this journey. Next slide, please, Jesse. And so if we look at an individual and their needs overall, it can get really complex quickly. And so we did a chunk of work over the past 2 years with an amazing research group out of U of T trying to describe even how do we quantify all the needs an individual might have. And it balloons, and then some people need much less, some people need much more. And so this need for kind of, it's called an ontology, but a dynamic ontology. And there's no one size fits all. If we kind of look at history of how we've responded to crises, if you look at, let's say, homelessness, the easy answer is just, oh, we just need more housing. But if you look at the individual needs, it actually can be much more complex. So it might be someone's income is high enough to get housing, and they just have mental health issues that prevent them from keeping housing or staying in the housing. And so really, one of the things with the data, and you can't always do it, but really understanding those drivers and those needs of the individual and the unique problem you're actually trying to solve is so important. I've seen this get misused so often is what you want to predict out, what you want to find the answer to, you're not actually looking at the right data to do that. And so that's part of this journey of kind of really discovering the data you can use. The other complexity that kind of layers on top of this is how needs change over time. So using kind of the housing example, you've got someone into housing, great, but for kind of that sustainable change, they might then need help getting employment. So let's say they have a literacy problem and they need support on, or it might be that they just need kind of that help in finding roles that would suit their needs or any other subsequent conditions they're struggling with. And so over time, even just in the course of how you're assisting individuals in our community can change in a fairly big way. Next slide, please. And so it's interesting too, because we hear about all these fancy AI models or how, Google or some other big company can predict out all these amazing things, but it really is a bit of a nuanced art. And so you can always create a projection or prediction. The question is it useful or is it anywhere near accurate? And that's where a lot of the complexity from this comes from, because we want to get ahead of kind of where do we spend our money, where do we spend our time, where do we spend our effort with changing demographics, with changing communities, changing needs. But to do that, you really got to dig deeper, because we can predict out, let's say, homeless rates in a community in the subsequent years. And we've tried that before. And the problem is we didn't have the data, we didn't have kind of the drivers we needed to effectively predict it out. And so it really is important about being able to predict, being able to use the data to get ahead of social trends and social issues. But with that, you really need to kind of dig into it and make sure you understand, because, and I'll talk about this subsequently, but information and technology is so much more accessible these days, but so often we don't actually understand or hear the nuance when we access it. And so, for example, I can hop in ChatGPT and say, how do I predict out homelessness in the community? It can give me information, but just because I can make that prediction or toss it into, code or something like that doesn't mean it's anywhere near correct or useful in my circumstance. Next slide, please. And so if we also kind of look at the macro level, we can look at the individual, their needs, but at a macro level, we have to look at kind of a whole system and how it interacts. And so here's some examples we've done previously of looking at kind of cash flows in and out of community. And it's always really fascinating to dig into this. And so, for example, we were working with Calgary and doing a survey of mental health services, and seeing the data afterwards, it makes sense, but all the services, all the cash flow was really focused on kind of the core of Calgary, Versus if you're in the surrounding communities, there's very little money flowing into organizations at the periphery of Calgary. And so there's that whole kind of access issue and kind of funding flows issues. Or you can also track when you layer on, let's say, referral data to some of this. You get some really interesting pictures where you have kind of a hub and spoke model where some organizations are, doing most of the referrals, are heavily utilized, and others are actually underutilized. And so when you look at the whole system and kind of how it interacts, you can find some amazing learnings. And going back to Jesse's supply and demand, you can have organizations that have, multi-year waiting lists and other ones that have a week of waiting lists. And so really looking into the data, understanding those flows and understanding how a system interacts with itself can really open up a lot. And it's not that, one organization necessarily is doing anything differently, but rather word of mouth, how they interact, information available, all the things play into how people access or really know about a service in a community. And so we've got to keep up with both kind of the individual, the systems level, and then be responsive to that change. And so I promise it won't be all doom and gloom, but there is a ton of complexity here, and it's not just specific to the social sector. I've worked in healthcare, a bit in insurance, and other kind of private sector roles, and it really is, the complexity is not that uncommon or that different between sectors. It's really, spending that time mixing it with that subject matter expertise and that technical expertise, which is really where this starts getting cool. Next slide, please.
Matt, if I could just add, one of the analogies I was speaking to someone the other day about was the concept of supply chain logistics. So food sector is really, really good, and we have some food sector partners really good at thinking about their delivery of goods and services through a supply chain, because that's where we got supply chain from. In essence, though, the way we deliver social programs is also supply chain logistics. And I'm not referring to moving people, I'm referring to bringing goods and services to people that they need, that are well matched to where they are at a certain point in time. But the data systems we need and the decision points that we need in order to effectively do that are out of our reach. And whether it's because of resources or available data or capacity or time, or that everybody on this call is being asked to respond to a new social issue every day, that's one of the challenges we identified kind of throughout the years, and I'm sure you have as well, but are starting to see a glimmer of hope on some really accessible tools that we might be able to use that are not going to create extra work, but will help us start to build the robustness of analysis and decision making and looking ahead that we want to. And these are not in 2-3 years. This is not an Apple iPhone release. This is now. This is things we can be doing tomorrow.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, it goes back to what I was saying on a lot of these problems are similar. And so supply chain they've spent billions on optimizing that, creating fancy mathematical models. There's people who just their whole life is, how do I optimize process? And so there's so much out there that we can learn from and really grow from. And there's great resources out there. And it's really, how do I redefine and kind of use all the great work that's already been done to help me solve my current problem? And so how do we get there? The good news is this is all doable. This has been done in many industries, and getting to see how the sausage is made in a few different areas, it is scary how much a lot of organizations, Canada and internationally, need to kind of get ahead of the game with data, how to use it, how to utilize it, because it can do amazing things with better outcomes, to reducing the stress on employees, and really being able to follow up on where do we invest and how. But how we've approached this is, we really are in, I'd say in the past 15 years or so, a bow wave of change in technology in general. And within the last 2 years, where this has come really evident, has been the rise of generative AIs, or large language models, and technology. And so it used to be, working with AI for more than a few years now, there's so much more work that needs to be done. You have to customize and train all these models. And there was very little generalization, especially in industry-specific areas. But now that we have access to large language models, there is so much more. It's called one-shot or few-shot learning, but where you can find the answers you need very quickly. And the other part that I think is really transformational is the ability of large language models to really communicate concepts in terms anyone can understand. You can also prompt it to explain it in different ways. And so it really has opened up a huge area of expertise to kind of anyone out there. You've always been able to Google or go deep or read the research papers, but now you can actually help summarize and really get into those details you may not have had access to before, or at least in a quicker manner. And so what we're seeing right now is where AI has come, even in just the past 3 or 4 years, is amazingly complex and amazing. But where it's going now, I think really we have such an opportunity to do so much more with less than we've ever been able to. And so next slide, please. And so the interesting part is being a huge technology and data nerd, it's not even about the large language model anymore. It's about what you can kind of stand up around it, because there's so much more you can add on top of a large language model to really make it work for your context, make it work for where you want to focus, so much better than just hopping on ChatGPT can do for you. So I'm not going to go into great depth about what a large language model is or all that. We did do a presentation last year on more in depth on kind of what the technology is and how it works. But really what it is that has changed the game is a large language model wasn't, let's say, a new technology. It's based on transformers. A lot of the foundational work there was if I remember correctly, 2018, 2019. What really changed the game was essentially the computing resources and the amount of data that was fed in. And so these models are massive. They've seen, in some cases, trillions of tokens. So that's just chunks of text. And so they're able to generalize better than anything we've had to date. What's interesting, though, is when you want to get specific, when you want to get into something where you need it to be right or know when it's wrong, that's where the field really is going, in my perspective, is how do we stand up those services and kind of tools around it to really be a game changer in what you're focusing on. And so diagram I have below is for what's called retrieval augmented generation. And so this is where you can take that skill set of being so generalizable and mix it with best in class information and knowledge. So let's say rather than allowing the LLM to go and search the web and provide info on encampments, which, if it's just pulling news articles, can be quite toxic or just weird. You can actually feed it in the knowledge where it's, best in class research, best in class outcomes, best in class, really just how do I deal with this? And allow it both to kind of mix that reasoning, that generalization with the quality of data. And that really is a game changer. And so this is just kind of a workflow below where you create a whole system of documents, link it to the LLM, and append that to any query you have to the LLM. And so what that means is not only are you asking it to kind of provide me some ways in which I can better engage with encampments in my city, but you can also append that really high quality research or knowledge base to that query to really get something much better out at the end. Next slide, please. And so why does this matter? And why can't we just depend on ChatGPT to do everything for us? It's interesting because while the model has seen trillions of tokens or trillions of chunks of text, it's really seen very little social specific data. And so if you look at some of the areas of what these things are being trained on, you're talking about like Reddit, Wikipedia, and things like this. And so it hasn't seen kind of the social context. And what this means in practice is kind of on the right here. And why a lot of enterprises have been a lot slower to adopt generative AI is they really need to ring fence it, and they really need to have those guardrails so they both know when they're getting a wrong answer and focusing on the right answers, but knowing what they're getting into from a bias and toxicity perspective. And so one thing, there's a ton of research out there right now, large language models can really amplify bias because you don't know the bias that they've been trained on, because they don't decide what bias is. They really just know kind of what they've been trained on. And so one of the more recent studies I've seen was using LLMs to sort resumes. What they found, though, when they did the research was it wasn't actually looking at the skills or the experience. It was actually prejudging people based in part on their name. And so there was that inherent bias that no one really knew until you dug into it. And to be honest, this is nothing new in AI. Really understanding what the model is predicting is so important because one of my favorite stories was it was predicting whether a patient from their chest x-ray had tuberculosis. And so some researchers came up with this amazing model. They thought they'd solve this and they could automate it all. Turns out what they were predicting was not actually tuberculosis, but what they did is the algorithm read the header on the file. Turns out TB is never diagnosed in the community, only diagnosed in hospital on a subset of machines. And so all they predicted out was the type of machine, and that was what gave them the accuracy. And it's the same thing with large language models. What they've been trained on influences what it predicts. Other thing, you might have heard about hallucinations. So this is where it just makes stuff up. I always like to call it very mansplaining. It is so confident with both right and wrong answers, and there's no kind of nuance there. And so if I'm interacting with someone, I might see kind of those social cues of someone being unsure, things like that. Nothing like that's in the model. It will always be very confident what it spits out, and that can be quite dangerous because unless you kind of look into how the sausage is made or the back end of this, you're not looking about accuracy or how it's generating these answers. We've all seen in the news likely that toxic or harmful content is in there. There's a lot of back and forth on, people really gaming the LLMs to get this, or this is something they can just do on their own. It's funny things from, some reporter querying the LLM and the LLM telling them to leave their partner to, something that could actually be quite harmful to an individual. And so that toxicity or harm, using this beyond kind of that curated or really knowledgeable access can be dangerous if you're not careful. Also, kind of that reliability factor. LLM, I use them every day and I love them, but just because it's giving you 9 previous answers that have been out of this park, the 10th could be terribly wrong. And this is why you're seeing a lot more enterprises not necessarily just throwing, let's call it the Air Canada chatbot, where there's no kind of check and balances, to standing up a lot of stuff around it to make sure I know when it's wrong, I know when it's pulling from, and I can monitor this workflow. And then finally, I think the biggest thing for us right now in the sector is it's not optimized for social. And so one test we ran recently is we were looking into can we provide kind of better analysis of emergencies in a community if you've received our signals, blog or email blast or whatever you want to call it. We actually have some great documentation. We've collated the research. We are querying the LLM. But what we found was it had no context of what a homelessness emergency was, right? And so since it hasn't seen any social data, something that might be, something very basic to individuals on this webinar today, it has no context for. And so we really had to kind of engineer the prompt to get something better out of it, because it had no clue what this social context was. And so I've kind of gone a bit more negative on the drawbacks, but this is I truly do believe a transformational and amazing technology that we can use. And I love using it every day. But, like anything, you want to use it with a note of caution. Love coffee, live on it, but I can't drink 12 cups a day. You need to kind of balance it with realities of what it gives you. Next slide, please. And so the nice thing we can do at HelpSeeker is really that economies of scale. Because we run into a lot of data problems, because we run into a lot of kind of large scale systems problems, we can really take the time and build out the expertise to tackle this in a more systematic manner. And so if we look at kind of City of Toronto, they have access to data scientists, they have access to analysts, they have a lot of resources, but a lot of the people who deal with these social challenges kind of on the ground could be a 10-person organization, could be a 20-person organization, and they can't access a data scientist, let alone, even a business analyst to help. And so where we've really focused is how can we provide that automation or tools, or really unleash that economies of scale to build out something more sustainable. And I do think this is where the technology is heading, not just in the social sector, but really how can we better utilize that LLM so we can take out some of the risk or guesswork and really make sure we know and our partners know when and how to use it appropriately. And so what we're doing kind of in the background, I'll show some examples of this, is really mixing the social sector expertise of people like Jesse or Alina in our organization with really that data science or technical expertise to work with the LLM to really create that more holistic answer solution. But Jesse, please.
Sorry, Matt, I know it's not my turn. I just wanted to say, over the past several weeks, Matt has sent Alina and I thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of outputs, and we've combed through them line by line, looking at the question and what answer it's giving, and we'll say, yep, nope, Yes, that's good. Yes, that's appropriate. Yes, that's inclusive. No, that's a bad strategy. Yes, that's a good strategy. And then what we've also done is created a whole, and will continue, a whole knowledge base on all of the amazing work that we've done with many of you on this call here today, and lives in Alina's brain, which is a big brain if you know her. And so what we're trying to do is leverage all of that expertise and work and partnership that we and others have had and progress, and say, how do we build something that's reliable and safe and useful for the person that lives in a social planning department of one, or a charitable organization of two, as well as the person sitting in the city of Toronto making complex social decisions. And how do we put our stamp on it and say, yeah, we of course there's risks, but we put the help seeker stamp that we believe this is accurate and this is right.
Thanks, Jesse. And I think that's key here with any research or innovation. You got to kind of approach it with that kind of experimental attitude. And so back in my research days, there was a famous story. And so it was one process called X-ray crystallography, and it was tough. And so one research group had spent years trying to get this protein structure, let's call it an output. And after years and probably 6 figures of spend, they were no closer. And one day, essentially what they added to their experiment was pickle juice. I think someone very late in the lab one night was just getting frustrated and said, I'm going to throw this pickle juice in there. And it actually made the experiment work. And not just one type of pickle juice, it was this specific pickle juice from this jar of pickles would work, nothing else would. And so it's really odd story, I know, but it's really that experimentation and trying a lot of different things, which leads these innovations to become effective. Because I don't think large language models are at the point right now where we can just kind of use them out of the box without that experimental attitude. Next slide, please. And so this really is where we're going, where we're doubling down on, is we think the LLMs are going to be a huge part of how we can really innovate in the sector. So how can we set up an accessible workflow that has all these checks and balances behind it? And so part of this is even just the security of it. There's no encryption going back and forth between you and ChatGPT, so you got to be really careful there. But how can we create a workflow of, we do kind of goals and actions right now. And so how can we work with individuals to really generate the best in the most accessible and most affordable manner from all this technology? And so in this case, you can kind of see on the right here, this kind of goal systems of where we can generate goals, recommend goals, and use this to kind of create a workflow and use the technology to really generate something powerful and useful to you as the individual. And so we've been doing a bunch of experimentation, like Jesse said, to really get this to somewhere where it's getting something useful to you right away. And so it's not a question of you got to wait for someone to produce this research in weeks or months, but rather, can we get this to you the day of you asking this question? Or if we can't, how can we kind of get that information and support you on that journey, but also use that economies of scale to say, that there's 20 different communities we know right now who are struggling with how do I effectively integrate with mental health services from the health system with kind of those more social specific mental health supports. And we can kind of look at that individual problem and access it and really try to optimize for it. But next slide, please.
One of the things, just briefly, we did is we went through the last several years of partnerships we've had, and we anonymously but extracted all of the goals, the inherent explicit and implicit goals of the projects, and then we narrowed those down to 20, 25 actually fairly similar things. And what we're noticing is though it's different topics, different places, there's a lot of consistency among social infrastructure decision makers insofar as their goals. So part of our intent with this new AI-powered software is to be able to preload those goals and then allow you to browse them, and as well you'll get a pre-selected recommendations on what your next steps would be. Some of those will be AI generated that you'll be able to do themselves. Some of them you can request for support on, but we're really trying to kind of take ourselves out and allow you more resources and nimbleness in a safe and ethical way to explore solutions.
Thanks, Jesse. And so how does this kind of look from a workflow perspective? If you could go to the next slide. There we are. Really is kind of looking at how can we, like Jesse said, auto-generate that and really make this more of a seamless process. The more we work on this, kind of the more we can get data up front or quicker data in response. But really kind of that choosing a goal, receiving a list of suggested actions. So, in response to, let's say, having a goal of giving a council briefing on housing activities in my community, or in this case, creating inclusive recreation programs. What are the suggested actions and what data can we base this off of? And so that's what we're really looking at, kind of feeding into this a bit better as well, is why do you need a third party to generate the analysis when we can kind of auto-populate that live for you? And so if you can go to the next slide, Jesse. And what this actually looks like is on the right here. There's more text that's actually behind this, but this is an actual output that we just summarized a bit from the system we have today. And so this can be for any city. This can be for even provincial or federal level. This can be a series of different kind of queries. And what we've done is more curate both what information goes into this. So if we're looking at recreation and community, what information do we have access to? Clean it up, make sure it's fed into these large language models. And then on right here, you see kind of the outputs that you can get. So what is an accessible manner you can actually get an analysis out of the census? Because we've experimented with this a few different ways, and massive reports aren't really going to help on an individual basis. So how can I query a specific question like, from an economic perspective, how does the city of Edmonton look, or how does the city of Toronto look? And it's interesting looking at Edmonton, because that's where I'm from. We don't have a lower per capita rate of homelessness, but we're actually one of the more affordable cities to live in. And income-wise, it actually is higher compared to a lot of other municipalities. And so if you look at it, you can also see actually there's higher increasing rates of unemployment, and other kind of complexities in homelessness in homelessness in Edmonton that we really do struggle with. And so this is what we're really looking at, and how many hours can we save by feeding in this information quickly to people who really need it, versus kind of waiting for that analysis and report, because right now improving the effectiveness of kind of how quickly this runs, but this can be spat out in a couple minutes or less. So that's pulling the census data. It's already clean, it's already ready, it's already there for your municipality, and we can really push out those insights and then link them to further steps. And some of the areas we're looking at now is not just how do we provide that census profile, but how can we link this to best practices based on your information. And so there's a lot more work going into this, and this really is just step one. But really, it's about how do we democratize access to this. So you don't need a massive budget or many staff to analyze all this information, but how can we make that 10-person, that 20-person organization have access to the same quality of analytics and information as those massive ones?
Sorry, Matt, to interrupt. The extension of this as well is how to query a data set, which we chose census data set, but you can insert any other data set. We can insert any other data sets that you have. That is where we're going with this. And then using the same reliable, ethical, safe LLM that we're creating in order to query it, to ensure that when we're asking questions of that data set, it's bringing back things that are accurate and responsible. And so that's why we started with census. It's a uniform data set, and we have it now for the whole country, all communities. But the soon extension of this over the next several months is diverse data sets, both publicly available and then individual as well.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I should note too is we're very careful about how we use this. I know Jesse and others, the organization, have gotten angry emails from me being like, what are you putting in here? How are you using it? What type of queries are you running? Because it's really easy to not pay attention and put something sensitive into somewhere it shouldn't be, or something more public. And so part of this too is how can we make sure this system is more seamless for the user, and there isn't that stress about, if I upload this data or if I do this, am I doing something wrong? And so kind of part of what stood up around this really is, how do we protect this data? How do we respect this data? How do we use it effectively? And too often that can be overlooked if we're not careful. And so, Jesse, I'll hand it back to you.
Oh, sorry, Matt. I was giving you the hook. Are you good? You're done. I just want to make sure there's time for QA. Sorry. So we have a small group of social infrastructure leaders who, not a ton of time, but we've been testing with. If you're interested in being part of our testing group, early preview of new features, want to have some discussions around AI, how it impacts you, and where we're going with this, please just send me an email. Would love for your input. This is such a pivotal time, and Canada lags significantly, as does government and nonprofits, specifically in Canada, on AI adoption. And so we're at a critical juncture at a sector, and we would love for you to sort of be on board. I do, Patrick, want to answer your question in a minute, but if you're interested in learning more and would like kind of a formal demo of the new one, you can scan this very cool looking QR code and book a meeting, as well as you can reach out to myself and I can funnel you to the most appropriate person. The next webinar, before we do Q&A, Harnessing Data for Social Impact, guide to the comprehensive guide to the data lifecycle. So Patrick, I think your question there, I'm going to add to it, but this would be the webinar for you. It's going to go through each aspect of the data cycle and strategies for improvements for both and how to assess it. I did want to say to you though, just in the QA, I'll leave this up here. We have a methodology we use. We're working with a school board right now on exactly that, optimization of their existing data. And school boards are incredibly complex in how they collect data and the need to measure better outcomes among students and then match them to appropriate supports and services. So we have a day-long methodology, an initial kind of thing that we use. I'd be happy to share the whole day with you, just how we walk through it. And it goes through various exercises you need to do to kind of take a stock in what you're doing, and then suggestions for how you would follow up. So if that's useful at all, drop me a line and I'll for sure send that to you. In regards to the standardization and definitions across regions, that was even across supports and organizations. When we developed the ontology and the taxonomy, that was one of the biggest things we did. So we scraped through the largest data set for social services in Canada, which we have. And we came up with something like 6,000 different words for services. It was 6,000 components. And then for clients descriptions, it was another 3,000. It was enormous. So even standardization in non-regional aspects has been challenged. Again, I would be happy to chat to you about some of the things we've done, and we'll hand it over to you because the more the merrier working on this. Emmanuel. Is that a deliberate hand?
So
hey, my team, are we able to make it so Emmanuel can speak? Is that me? Here. Okay. Emmanuel, I'm going to unmute you. Oh, you have permission to talk. I think you should be able to speak now if you'd like. Okay, we'll let you keep going. Tyler. I don't know if these are deliberate hands or not.
there's some questions in the webinar chat we can answer,
great.
Jesse.
Perfect.
So given the importance of data in this offering, can you speak to data quality, data gaps, and data collection by organizations looking to better evaluate outcomes? I can take a crack at this one. So it's about really understanding what the data quality is and what you can do with it. And so there's always going to be issues with data quality. Digging into kind of what that means is going to be vital. So there's standard data quality metrics like completion, variability, things like that you can look into. But really, I would always suggest just starting to use the data, because that's what's going to tell you what you need to improve and how to change things. And so, for example, you might be already working with Hyphus or another CRM and collect, let's say, 200 data points already on each interaction. But really, what's most important is going to be 20 of them that you really need to optimize and improve and make sure they're getting filled out every time there's that interaction. And so it's a process or a journey, I would say, with the data quality. And so knowing what gaps are in there right now, so you don't, let's say, create a projection you're basing all your resources on with something that has, 50% of the data missing or something. But really starting that journey of the day and digging in and balancing what you can do today with the data, which you'd be surprised with what you can do even with just open data, against kind of what you need to go towards as data collection, data accuracy.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to answer the question here, and then I'll ask Matt to chime in. The question is, I'm curious about the ethical considerations in collecting and using data for social good. Definitely. How do you navigate the fine line between impactful use of data and respecting individual rights and consent, especially in situations where obtaining explicit consent might be challenging? Absolutely. And I'll speak just from our vantage point first. We have really, really robust data sharing agreements, consent to collect, and we are not using any client level, and client being our clients, or individual level, which is service users data in our training. That's just not something we're doing. If at some point we decide to introduce that, that would be through a really, again, robust and clear consent process for someone to opt into that. But at this point in time, that's not what we're exploring. As for organizations on their own, that's one of our kind of grave concerns about ChatGPT. ChatGPT is amazing. We love it. We use it. But our kind of grave concerns about people understandably wanting to use it and experiment it and uploading, which you're able to, individual files, individual client level data into GPT, which has a whole host of security and privacy breach. It would be in most instances a privacy breach for most organizations under a PIA. So that's a great question. It's a fine balance. I think one of the issues is our consent processes, even for basic things like recording a transcription or storing data, aren't robust enough. We're not clear where we store it, who accesses it, for how long. And so I don't have a good answer. I think we have a ways to go in regards to that issue. We, the royal we, and to ensure that that's above board. But from HelpSeeker standpoint, it's not on for us in regards to using personal and individual level data to train the LLM. The next one I wanted to mention, Matt, anything to add on that one or in our last?
No, I was just going to go to the next question.
Oh, okay. Did you want to, I was going to do the work with local nonprofit. Is that
okay,
one you want to do?
Go for it.
Oh, okay. We didn't practice. Okay. I work with a local nonprofit that's trying to better understand the housing crisis in our community. How can we leverage data analytics to not only understand the current landscape, but also predict and prepare for future trends? Are there specific types of data or analytical methods that are most effective for this? Yes, there's a few different ways to do it. And what I like to tell my team is there's really fancy AI predictive, and that's great. That's awesome. There's also the difference between making a business case and a science case. And if what you're trying to do is show that there's a critical misalignment between the supply and demand, or that there's a critical investment needed, there's a lot of proxy data you can use. We use a combination of point in time count data, some estimates on supply. We look at average costs of, say, shelter spaces or any other unit you want to measure. Sometimes there's administrative data and shelter reports and that sort of thing. So my recommendation to you would be call us and we can help. We can point you in the right direction. But Matt, what you're trying to measure is, what do I think the demand is? How do I think the demand might change based on a series of assumptions? What is the existing supply? And what's the relative shortfall between that based on how much that shortfall is per space, how much might we need to invest? And that's kind of the logic of it. How you build each one of those pillars, you just need a Google sheet, an Excel sheet if you want to do it as to start. And then you can start introducing kind of more advanced analytics as you go.
And there's another question here about the role of advanced analytics like AI and machine learning in interpreting complex data sets related to social challenges. So I'd really say you got to use the right tool for the right job. I love technology. I love these complex models, but they do not work in every situation. Sometimes you really just want to go back to the data and do some basic analysis. And so I think it can really open up a lot. And so, for example, one advantage of looking at it from the AI perspective is you can feed in data, you can feed in an outcome and ask it to come up with the rules, and the relationships and kind of correlation can find you would never find in a million years. Some of the ones I've seen are just plain hilarious. But at the end of the day, I think it doesn't fit everything. And so before you do any AI work, I'd say you really want to do some basic analysis to say I have enough data. I'm confident in my data, so I'm not feeding in a bunch of garbage because then I'm going to get garbage insights out. And then sometimes I normally just start with the least complex and move up. So start with that analytics, start with kind of that basic analysis, and even just standard deviation, average, basic metrics, and work your way up. Because sometimes you'll find you'll get an amazing answer before you hit anything complex, and other times you do really need that advanced tool to solve a complex challenge. But I'm getting that time to wrap up.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, folks, for joining us, and appreciate the number of people willing to talk about AI and data. Have a great afternoon. Please join us for the next one. Reach out if you want to chat any of these topics more. We're living and breathing it now, and we're building it as we go. So we would love your input. Adios.
Thanks, everyone.